a spooky series of chillingly curated tales, written and narrated by short, scary horror stories.
For Jonathan and his team, the journey to Cairo had been both emotionally and physically draining, but in no way had the mileage endured, eclipsed that yearning sense of universal excitement shared amongst him and his crew upon arrival. After all, Egypt was an ancient, almost mystical sand-swept land steeped in captivating culture, whose historical significance still glitters in the sun's gaze. Its legendary landmarks, such as the Great Pyramids of Giza, so imposing in stature, even appear to defy the diminishing effects of time, and the strict corrosive laws to which objects and organisms are universally bound. It is, therefore, to the civilization's immense credit, that these towering monuments of impressive architecture dominate the landscape today. Situated not far from the pyramids is the Great Sphinx, an enormous sculpture, half man, half lion in appearance, whose stunning iconography is only known worldwide, ominously guards the sacred stones within touching distance of the site itself. For the team, the notion of Egyptian excavation proved so seductive a proposition that collectively, they would have paid any price to do so. It is then of no surprise that, in total, the archaeological dig had taken several years to fully secure. During which time, the British and Egyptian authorities had fiercely disputed the residing place of royalties, with little to no conclusion. Peter, who had shared many expeditions with Jonathan, and whose experience was an invaluable asset to the team, finally managed to cut a deal, after much commitment to the cause, that appropriately compensated all parties involved. A contract which in itself required considerable political wrangling and patient diplomacy. In the past, various exhumations, like Howard Carter's wonderfully preserved sarcophagus of Tutankhamun, had seemingly caused underlying controversy within the region. After all, unsubstantiated reports around the time had suggested some within Egypt saw Howard's dig as an invasive act of sabotage, succeeding only in interrupting the sanctity of their enshrined king. Whether that's indeed factual or not remains to be seen. Within the excavation agreement struck by Peter, the only noticeable caveat occurred in the form of a 3-day time limit, to which the crew was held contractually. However, if nothing else, this restriction only sought to instill a strong sense of urgency amongst Jonathan and his staff, who were eager to start the operation in motion. By its illustrious nature, this venture crystallized the idyllic culmination of Jonathan's journey, to which all previous endeavors paled in their significance. And, in respect of this, it was safe to surmise that nothing he had excavated before this point could even come close to matching this potentially euphoric moment. The site itself was far less glamorous or remarkable than those nestled betwixt the fabled Valley of the Kings. In fact, the tomb was so unknown to the crew that they had only recently been made aware of its existence. It was, in a sense, a relatively odd scenario, especially in light of their shared expertise and knowledge in the field. Nonetheless, they got to work. A geographic study of the region had highlighted several unique features within the encircling rock face. After consulting old maps borrowed from the National Museum, the team quickly deduced the crypt's location. By design, the entrance to the tomb consisted of a long narrow tunnel about the width of 2 average men standing side by side. Charting its course, a detailed mural ran parallel to the passage, depicting recurring themes of nature and colorful portrayals of life. Yet amongst the imagery exhibited lay a curious figure unavoidable in its strangeness. As an accomplished archaeologist, Peter had learned the fundamental principles of Egyptian art, which tended to obey stringent laws when drawing people. As a consequence, they would typically adopt side-facing stances, seen two-dimensionally through the viewer's eyes. Mystified by what was in front of them, this uniquely forward-looking portrait shared several disturbing signatures, none of them had seen before. Most severe in starkness were its black elliptical eyes and almost ghostly complexion. 2 aspects so uncharacteristic and alien to Egyptian art's established formula that the team failed to prescribe or pinpoint a historical period. All the while, a prickly chill had begun to penetrate the corridor air. In Jonathan's mind, the picture presented an oddly menacing pose, as if possessed by some demonic presence. The lips carried a subtle smirk, while long razor-sharp teeth accompanied the mouth on either side. Stood behind were roaming figures draped in cloth, whose eyes shone a cherry red. Irregular in shape, the head was largely elongated with horns protruding from the temple sides. Alarmed by what they just witnessed, the team nonetheless scuttled toward the inner chamber. Shortly after, a space opened up at the hallway's climax, and a subterranean necropolis of exquisite beauty greeted the group. What followed was a cemetery so aesthetically resplendent and befitting of the gods themselves. Based on the team's initial findings, the crypt appeared smaller than nearby tombs of similar lineage, but boldly extravagant in character nonetheless, and grandiosely adorned with exotic embellishments, handsomely befitting the royal dignitaries entombed inside. Aesthetically, the tomb's surrounding sanctum bore stark signatures illustrating immense artistic talent, abstract flair, and refined taste. Indeed, such elaborate expression and creative ingenuity could only truly flourish under a considerably advanced culture, relishing in its time. Further still, the tomb's exquisitely ornate appearance exuded such bewildering beauty that it summoned a deep sense of euphoria within the entire excavation team. To the archaeologists involved, every element of the lavish interior inspired awe. Emanating from the walls lay gold-encrusted depictions of immaculate decoration, colorfully splashed with every possible pigmentation. While up above, a romanticized godly portrait offered poetic insight into the profound passing from this world to the next. Symbolic perhaps, if nothing else, of Egypt's strict subservience to the gods, to whom they knelt with such willful obedience. Studying the tomb's internal structure, the team continued surveying with intense astonishment. Meanwhile, its vividly exotic color palette produced an almost hypnotic aura, arousing the senses of Peter and his team. Unlike other burial sites, the box-like caskets where corpses are typically stored, otherwise known as the sarcophagus, stood upright in designated slots along the outer wall. Often gilded with gold-laced trim and garnished by extraordinary engravings emblematic of life and its many living creatures. Of greater significance, though, on one casket, in particular, was the lack of lavish furnishing and a distinct absence of decoration. This fact, coupled with its colossal size comparatively to other coffins, continued to perplex both Peter and John, who had become baffled by its enigmatic properties. Swiping away the cobwebs, Peter proceeded to place his palm upon the lid of the coffin, only to fall into a vivid cognitive trance. Overcome by deep hypnosis, a succession of hieroglyphs raced through his mind, alongside a lucid reconstruction of the tomb. In this parallel portrayal, his crew's bodies were wrapped in cloth, their faces blurred beyond all previous recognition, and their arms lumberingly outstretched, as if summoned by some supernatural spirit of commanding presence. While eerily, before their feet, the crypt lay vacant and ajar. Throughout this episode, Peter's entire body remained utterly incapacitated. Witnessing the possession, John attempted to repatriate Peter with his senses, violently shaking him from the shoulders. Until, finally, Peter seemingly regained himself, slumping to the ground soon after. But in the sudden descent, his eyes, upon rolling over, momentarily burned a crimson red. Suddenly, a vicious injection of wind rushed through the inner cavity, followed swiftly by a tremendous crash of momentous force, which, by sheer intensity, proceeded to unsettle the surrounding sand from its foundations. In its wake, the gust of ungodly strength had extinguished all lanterns in the room, leaving only one remaining. Struck with fear and rooted still in sheer disbelief, the crew desperately swarmed around the last remaining torchlight, whose racing hearts now beat a climactic rhythm of scaling intensity. Out of nowhere, the dissonant clashing of thick stone and granular sand spawned an almost spine-chilling shriek. Then, in a fate worse than death, the team could only watch in agonizing despair as the entrance slid shut from behind, plunging the room into total darkness and imprisoning them within. Sensing the crew's elevated fear, Jonathan desperately sought a route of escape. Yet, isolated and scared stiff, the crew's fates now rested firmly on Flame's rapidly diminishing flicker, which, by now, had begun to cast abominable shadows upon the enclosing stone face, further fueling a dizzying feeling of dreaded suspense and heightened claustrophobia as blackened, ambiguous souls danced between each glimmer of light. Trapped and consumed by blind panic, Peter hurriedly snatched the flame from Jonathan's hands, pointing it towards the wall. But to his immeasurable horror, he soon discovered a vacant space where the coffin had once sat. A loud creak then infiltrated the air, followed by the harsh thudding of heavy footsteps, each pounding stride triggering booming tremors through the earth beneath them. Then, the torchlight issued its last streak of life, and in the vague dimness of the light, with pulses soaring, the crew could see stumbling towards them with demonic mutterings, the mummified remains of Egypt's bloodline.
Don't forget to subscribe for more spooky tales, written and narrated by short, scary horror stories.